Welcome to Pitch It To Me Podcast, a show about the subjective past, present, and potential future of Flesh and Blood design. Thanks to our one viewer in Australia, we're now an international sensation. Today's episode is on hybrid cards and heroes. On Red Pitch, Fuzzy does a recap of hybrid cards from Outsiders and Dynasty. And on Yellow Pitch, Clark will create 2 hybrid card archetypes. On Blue Pitch, Joel will pitch some custom hybrid hero designs. You can find us across all socials, such as TikTok and Instagram at Pitch It To Me Podcast.
I'm Clark.
I'm Joel.
And I'm Fuzzy. Welcome to the show.
So, big thanks. We have one listener in Germany, one listener in the United Kingdom, one listener in Australia, and even one person in the Philippines who watched our one YouTube short.
Let's go.
Thank you so much.
Real gamers.
I really hope you guys aren't just using VPNs. Totally a possibility.
Hey, but if you are, no judgments.
No.
No. VPNs, you do you. You got to keep yourself safe. That's okay.
Maybe we'll even advertise one in the future.
That would be the dream.
That would be the dream. We made it. We got a Surfshark sponsorship.
Or what is it, NordVPN?
Yeah, NordVPN.
For today's episode, we wanted to talk about the most environmentally conscious cards in Flesh and Blood. Hybrids. Hybrid cards. In the last year, we've seen the lines blur between classes in 2 big ways. In Dynasty, Emperor was printed as a warrior wizard, a royal draconic warrior wizard. Like they were trying to see how many words they could get in that bottom line.
The answer is 4.
Hero. 5.
Oh, wow. Well, I guess we had that with
it also
some
young?
of
That's
the-
a young hero. They had 6 words in that text. And in Outsiders, there are a bunch of cards that could be played by either Assassin/Ranger or Assassin/Ninja. We're going to be talking about both today and come up with some custom designs for both types of hybrid cards.
Yeah, so before we get into any of our custom designs and where we think this stuff may go in the future, Fuzzy, why don't you walk us through what the past looked like?
Yeah, for Red Pitch, I want to talk about those hybrid cards, what I think they feel like design-wise and for the players, and what we might expect out of the future for similar cards. So for the hybrid cards, when I think of hybrid cards in the community, like talking points, I usually think of the ones from Outsiders. And the first thing I think of with hybrid cards like this is how they're able to make the draft experience so much smoother. Mm-hmm. I literally think that's the biggest benefit they have, and that might be a little bit short-sighted to think of draft primarily, where the game has so much of a classic constructed focus, but this fact that now the draft is no longer quite on rails, and by on rails I mean like when once you've decided what hero you have, you just pick cards from that hero and hope that you're like one of the few people, maybe the only person on that hero, right? I am drafting Monarch. Once I've decided I'm Chain, I take Chain cards. It's easy, right? The only overlap is the generics. Arcane Rising also feels like a similar, very on-rails draft experience. But with Outsiders, there's actually a lot more fluidity, and there's a little bit more of players vying for similar cards because of these hybrid cards. Now you have half the table looking for these hybrid Ranger cards, Assassin Ranger, Assassin Ninja cards, even though everyone already knows what their hero is, you know?
Yeah, it feels like generics, but they're way more flavorful.
Yeah. And they're a little bit more focused than generics. They're halfway between. Mm-hmm. So you have a lot more nuance between what cards like are yours that you don't need to worry about drafting or that you snap pick versus cards that could be yours if you want them, if you want to prioritize them.
And then maybe it also even lets them push it a little bit. Like maybe they don't want to print a card because they're worried about it being generic. They're worried about it being able to be used by everyone. Mm-hmm. But when they hybridize it, it's still able to fulfill that role that a generic does in the draft of like, oh, I can pick this card and stay open, not quite marry into an archetype yet. Or even this can shift into another archetype. The thought that I have is like Death Touch. Like, I feel like Death Touch is a card that they wouldn't have printed if it was generic. Like, they would have been very afraid of printing that as a generic card. But because they were able to say, okay, if this is only going to be for assassin heroes and ranger heroes, we feel better printing this and giving those two classes this tool without opening it up to everybody.
I feel similarly about Codex of Frailty, except, again, more in a classic constructed sense. Codex of Frailty is busto. It is a good card. And both Assassin and Ranger, before Outsiders, they were a little bit, dusto. They were not very good cards. Not very good classes. And they could certainly use the love of a broken-ass card that you can slot into your deck.
Oh, they're using it now. That's for sure.
Yes, they are.
And then Lexi got really strong, immediately after, right? Ooh, she never was a super top-tier hero before that. It's very efficient for them to be able to print one card that boosts two classes, because that's 5 heroes that they gave power to with a single card. There's not a lot like that in the game outside of generics that accomplishes that.
Yeah. And if moving forward, they're for other expansion sets, this now means that they can print a hybrid card to try to target 2 different play groups.
Right.
2 different mains.
Yeah, that's something I've noticed in LSS as well, is since Uprising, or even Tales of Aria, they've really been upping their draft game, or their limited game.
Yeah.
Because you look at Tales of Aria, I felt like you were kind of, this term on the rails is okay, you're getting Earth cards, but you're really trying to go more Briar or Oldhim. But you go over to Dynasty, and it felt like, you have this overlap in Draconic with Phi and Dromai, but really outside of Blaze Hedgehog? No, Headlong, that's what it is.
Yeah, Blaze Hedgehog.
Yeah.
Blaze Hedgehog.
Hedgehog was the meme that surfaced. Anyways, so there's Blaze Headlong, Phoenix Flame, obviously, is the Draconic attack, and then a few other ones that cared about Rupture. But it wasn't until Outsiders where they really, even though there's no talents, they really embellished on having this unique draft experience and supporting 6 heroes in one draft set just by fusing these 2 names onto one card.
Yeah.
It's pretty awesome. And I like that they're prioritizing draft, making it more, I guess, competitively stimulating, we'll say, instead of just, okay, you pick a bunch of chain cards, 3-0, whatever.
In terms of limited, I think it's just primo. I think hybrid cards are incredible. I really hope we see them again in the future, and this wasn't just a one-off idea.
Yeah.
Hopefully it was exciting enough and gave them enough ideas that we see it more and more moving forward.
I totally agree.
Yeah, maybe they saw it as a way to add in that flavor of talents without adding more talent, and then, like you said, we would love to see more of it, but what if it was just this one-time thing, and we are harping on this idea for no reason because they're not going to add it later on?
I can't imagine. I think it's too good of a tool. And I think LSS also are comfortable with the idea of doing anything that makes a set better.
Yeah.
They are comfortable going outside the box, and I think they'd have to have a good reason not to use hybrid cards in the future.
Yeah.
And maybe a part of that is just the limit of space, I'm sure it's really easy to make hybrid cards, but how easy is it to make interesting hybrid cards? You know? I think if you look at toxicity, I call that right on the border between boring and interesting, where it's just an on hit that does damage, a good, spicy amount of damage, but is this something that you think is, super unique to Assassin and Ranger? Is it, only Assassin and Ranger should be able to have an on hit that deals 5? It's not, something that you could only do as a hybrid card, but it does make the draft a lot better because it allows people to show whether Assassin and Ranger have been, taken up.
Yeah.
We touched on this a little bit before, but I also see hybrid cards as potentially a way for LSS to print more support for more classes. As the game ages, we see more and more classes being developed. Slowly right now, for sure. We saw Assassin this last year, and Illusionist was back in Monarch. That was a while ago that we saw the last class before Assassin. But eventually, I would imagine they add more. And with every new hero and with every new class, the game gets harder to support because you have players who are really attached to certain classes and they don't see cards for their classes printed in every set.
True.
We're already sort of seeing this with Outsiders and Dusk Till Dawn and Bright Lights coming up. Bright Lights is just Mechanologist. If you're a diehard Prism stan, then you don't necessarily have a lot of reason for the Mechanologist set, but you probably bought a lot of Dusk Till Dawn. But if you don't care about either any of the light or shadow heroes, then you don't have a lot of reason to buy Dusk Till Dawn. So it's very like pick and choosy as to what you might be interested in. Hybrid cards might be a way to alleviate that, right? If we're more efficient about giving out support, where it's no longer one card supports one class, now it's one card could support 2 classes or 3 classes.
Yeah.
My God.
And that would make it a lot easier for them to print support and get people to buy product. Hopefully, that's
Yeah,
my
so
guess.
are you saying, like, say, for instance, the newest set, Bright Lights, like, if they're only mechanologists, do they print, like, mechanologist and X class?
I mean,
As a
that would
hybrid
still
card?
allow them to have
Like,
crack shuffle play, where
sure.
every card in the set can be played in mechanologist, but it allows other classes to kind of get in on the action too.
Right.
I have no idea what that would look like for mechanologist, but yeah, as an example, that is kind of what I'm talking about, where they can focus in one and maybe also kind of print support for others in the form of these hybrid cards.
Yeah.
Or just have a really weird environment where there's lots of different support scattered across, like a more traditional supplemental set might have lots of different hybrid cards.
Yeah,
And-
so if I can maybe rephrase what you're saying to see if I understand it correctly, this would be like, let's say we have a Ranger, Assassin, Ninja, but then we also print some like Ninja Guardian cards.
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, that doesn't really matter for the limited at all, but now Guardian players have a reason to look at these specific cards and be interested in them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just an idea.
I feel like these nuggets are appreciated by players. Like, for instance, Dusk Till Dawn.
Yeah, they printed some like bog standard cards. Or like
Not even that. They printed Lost in Thought, which I don't think is a Prism card at all. And now Dromai players are like, let's go,
Yeah.
because they get this amazing card. They didn't really expect it. Like, I knew a lot of Dromai players who were like, I don't really care about this set. I don't need to buy anything. And they're like, oh, wait a minute. Now I need a play set. Now I need a rainbow foil play set,
And that comes from there being multiple heroes for a single class.
For sure.
They get to print jazz like that.
Yeah, that's fair.
I want to talk now about the Emperor from Dynasty. Can we talk about how insane the Emperor is as a card? They just dropped this on us. A warrior wizard. They didn't even make it a rune blade, right? They could have. They could have made this card a rune blade and it wouldn't have been that weird if you really wanted like the Emperor to showcase his like physical prowess as a warrior, but also his ability to cast spells. But no, they wanted a warrior wizard. They've never done a card with more than one class type before, and they didn't give us any vision of what they thought this hero might look like in practice.
Other than
and it's
Command and
royal and draconic. Yeah, they gave it Command and Conquer.
A generic that could already run.
Yeah, generics they can already run. Even all the like royal specific cards that you think of as royal cards are all actually generic.
But you can't go hog wild with all the warrior and wizard card pool because it can only run reds. They chopped that card pool up into a third. So you have like 2/3 of a hero. And it's really interesting, don't get me wrong. I actually kind of respect it. I respect LSS having the moxie to be like, well, you guys figure it out. Because there are a lot of Flesh and Blood players that are like, ooh, a puzzle. I love puzzles.
And then they made sure to not break him by giving him 15 health.
Yeah. I feel like that was just like a flex move, right? Like, oh yeah, we can do whatever we want and just give this weird hero to us that canonically died as soon as he appeared in the lore.
Yeah. It was so interesting.
It's the only precedent that we have for how we can expect multi-class cards in the future. He's the only way right now that we have of imagining what it might look like. And it does seem like LSS is scared of them. They pulled a bunch of levers down. Health to 15, not 20. Only red cards in the deck as a way of balancing them in anticipation, I think, of what they expected to be a really strong combination. Even though Warrior and Wizard have like almost no overlap, very little elegant way to use them together. The only real power that comes from that combination is just the strict physical and strict arcane aspect. In the same way that Runeblade hybrid damage is strong, someone threatening to be either a warrior or a wizard at any time, it's hard to block, right?
Yeah.
So, and from what I've heard, Emperor doesn't suck. Like, he goes around and I've heard of people winning armories with him, but, you know.
I mean, yeah, you can't really argue with Stormstriders and red arcane spell,
Yeah. Especially if you can like get someone to like hedge their bets in one direction or the other with their equipment. If they're doing all arcane barrier, then you just start throwing nothing but command and conquers at them and blaze headlongs. And then if they're, you know, all armor based, then you just start throwing your wizard spells at them. Like it's that flexibility is interesting.
It got me thinking though about what a multi-class hero might look like in the future. And I kind of gravitated towards this idea of a superclass. And it's something that like Joel and I were talking about earlier. So you'll see this idea come up more in Joel's blue pitch, where he gives a potential superclass idea. I'm imagining this superclass as something that overlays two classes.
So like, let's use the Emperor as an example. Rather than warrior and wizard being two words, you would like synergize that into a third title, right?
So like, as an example, maybe you have a monstrosity superclass that contains the brute and guardian classes. So you would have a class of monstrosity, but that class is allowed to have brute and guardian specifically, kind of like combination classes. But in this imagining, you could also print cards specifically for monstrosity instead of for brute and guardian if you wanted them to go specifically in that deck.
You would be able to run any card that says brute on it, any card that says guardian on it, and any card that says monstrosity on it.
Right.
So for this superclass idea, what if they called the Emperor a warlock, and a warlock is a superclass of warrior and wizard? So it works almost exactly the same way. The only difference would be if they printed new warlock cards that would only be able to be played in this superclass, this warrior wizard hybrid class called warlock. That way they can print warlock in the type line for Emperor. They can maybe put the warrior and wizard part in the reminder text.
Yeah, I think the idea behind this that we're sort of thinking is like, with those outsider cards, we'd like to see, especially the assassin ninja cards. We loved that dagger archetype. We'd love to see a hero about that, but we wouldn't want that hero to be ninja or want that hero to be assassin. We want them to be this middle thing.
Right, that you could print cards specifically to target.
Yeah, and rather than assassin ninja, because then any card would then need to be a hybrid. So rather than like a hybrid hero with both of these listed on it, it could be almost like printing a new class without having to give the massive amount of card support that a new class would require.
Yes.
Right, because like that's how hybrid cards feel in constructed, at least. Like in limited, it made a lot of sense because, you know, either one class could use it. But as the game grows and you have more classes, like instead of just creating brand new classes from scratch, it just seems like the next logical step would be to make it a class, and that way, you, like you said, Fuzzy, you can just print classes, or you can print cards specifically for that class and not overload either ninja or assassin with this insane support and make them broken.
Yeah, it's like a Venn diagram, right?
Right.
We don't want a bunch of circles that can't touch each other. We want them to overlap. We want that little middle ground where we can start specifically printing cards for.
Yes.
Without letting it affect too much of the other two circles.
Yeah, and that's kind of probably what they ran into with the Emperor when they first created him, is like, how do we not make this just better Kano by restricting him with the lower life total, only reds, and a really weird hero ability? Like, if you were to just come at it at a different angle and make it a class of its own, you could still impose like these restrictions to the deck composition while having the larger card pool and not making it this ridiculous monstrosity like Starvo was.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is something that like they should be afraid of, because every single hero that has Living Legend out so far is not a single circle, right? It's not just Guardian, just Runeblade. It's always a talented one. The larger card pools are the ones that are Living Legending out.
Yeah.
Right? Before Azalea's getting big, it's Lexi.
And that really does speak to the power of having a larger card pool. I totally agree, Clark. And if I was going to design a hero that was created from two existing classes, I think that would be the thing you have to be the most worried about. Like, imagine if you had a Ranger Guardian, right? Well, Rangers have Codex of Frailty, and Guardians have Spinal Crush. All of those power cards that you've been afraid of from both classes could just exist in that one hero, and you'd have to find a way of balancing that because Codex of Frailty into Spinal Crush sounds pretty annoying.
And you get a Ponder.
Yeah. Or even Brute Guardian would have all the blue 6s from Guardian would immediately make that Brute hero really strong.
LSS is so afraid of blue 6s. Dude, they're so afraid.
I think you could have probably 80 to 90% blue 6s in that deck. It just...
LSS could never.
Imagine the combo decks you could throw together. It'd be crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. Literally, Berserker Blood Rush. It would just be...
insane.
And terrifying.
With the occasional Spinal Crush thrown in there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's understandable that we don't see this very often so far, but maybe in the future, LSS will find ways to make it interesting and fair and fun to play with and against.
Yeah, I'm really going to be excited to see, Joel, how you tackled those sorts of super classes and what you were able to come up with.
Thank you. I'm open to you guys' feedback as well.
I did want to mention 2 ways that I could see them balancing it. The way that we see Emperor being balanced is they basically just nerfed him in stats.
Yeah, red only and then 15 health.
Right. They crippled him, and that massive card pool is supposed to be his strength, right? Mm-hmm. And they gave him some big disadvantages in order to overcome that incredible strength. The other way would maybe be to silo the design. We see this all the time in LSS's hero designs. Like Vincent, for instance, it's really hard to use if you're not using those Rune Gate cards. Her hero ability hurts you unless you can turn that weakness into an advantage, specifically with those Rune Gate cards. Mm-hmm. Vincent does have a really large card pool, but they use that siloing to balance her. Okay, so now that we've set the stage a little bit, let's see some ideas. Clark, why don't you give us some spice?
I don't have a lot of it. So for Yellow Pitch today, I'm going to be talking about some custom hybrid combos. Returning to the Outsiders idea. Combining 2 different classes together. The first one that I wanted to touch on is Runeblade and Wizard, which makes Joel shit his pants.
Yeah, no, this should not be a thing.
And yet, I have designed cards for it. Interesting.
Let's hear it, I guess.
So, the main reason why I combined these 2 is really the Oops All Arcane set that we've heard might be coming up in the future. So, Runeblade and Wizard are the 2 arcane damage classes, and LSS has both hinted at, I've heard multiple content creators talk about this all arcane set, where they're really going to try to print a lot around arcane damage and give arcane damage a lot of support. Oh, sorry, both support and counterplay, right? Like, the idea is that it's very hard to build a limited set with just a little bit of arcane damage. So they really, when they decide to focus on arcane damage, they really need to make it a bigger part of the set. So there's this Oops All Arcane idea. With Runeblade and Wizard being the 2 arcane damages, we would see them. And to help sort out the limited and smooth that whole situation out, they would want to create some hybrid cards for it. I think this would also be nice to try to add some complexity and creativity without breaking the existing heroes. Because I think every single time a Wizard card is printed now, LSS has to go, can Kano ruin everybody with this card?
No, seriously.
And every single time they print a new Runeblade card, it's like, is this just another Revel in Runeblood where Viserai is just going to deal incredible amounts of damage and bother everyone with it? They need to add complexity without breaking either of them. And so it's an interesting space. The first card I have is Aether Drain. It's a Runeblade Wizard non-attack action card that costs 2x, is a blue, and is majestic. You prevent the next X arcane damage. When you do, gain resources equal to the amount of arcane damage prevented this way. When you do, gain resources equal to the amount of arcane damage prevented this turn. Now, this is an extremely complicated card that we just cut out 10 minutes of debate and conversation.
I'm so glad you guys didn't have to hear that. Holy shit.
We did more R&D than they did for Tales of Aria.
It was tense. We argued. Me and Fuzzy went outside and we wrestled in his backyard.
I was crying the whole time. Couldn't control myself.
We came back in and we're all friends again. And we can keep moving forward.
And I love this design.
Yes. I never thought that you didn't like it, Fuzzy. I definitely just got frustrated as, oh, I wrote this in a way that doesn't work. Why doesn't my card work the way I want it to? And then me angrily shaking my computer.
I love the flavor of like a magical attack is coming at you, and you suck up their energy and shoot it right back at them. Like, that's amazing.
Yeah, I got the idea from Mana Drain from Magic the Gathering, which is counter target spell, you gain mana equal to the converted mana cost of the spell that you countered.
So cool.
So this was trying to create a similar idea of preventing arcane damage and then generating that into resources to fuel the rest of your turn. You prevent X arcane damage where X is what you paid into the XX cost.
So if you want to Arcane Barrier 3 damage, it would be 6 mana total or 6 resources total?
Yeah, 6 resources to stop 3 damage. And then when it resolves, you gain resources equal to the amount of arcane damage prevented this turn through Arcane Barrier or this card.
That's interesting that you made it a non-attack action.
Yes. So this was for 2 primary reasons. If it was an instant, you would like auto-include this
Right.
into any matchup that has any arcane damage.
It is blue, because this is a lot worse than Oasis Respite.
At first glance, remember it is prevented this turn, not prevented by this card.
Oh my god.
So you can Arcane Barrier, then play this for 0. But how do you play this for 0? You either have to Kano flip it off the top by spending another blue, or activate Storm Striders, or activate Spellbound Creepers. Spellbound Creepers has this really interesting line of text, attack or block with a Runeblade card to activate it. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with Spellbound Creepers, it's one of the most complex cards that Runeblades get to run. It says, at instant speed, pay 1 resource. If you have attacked or blocked with a Runeblade action card, you may play your next non-attack action card at instant speed. So the way that most Runeblades use this is offensively. They're attacking with a card, then they instant speed out some non-attack action card. If that non-attack action card has go again, they gain a resource, and they gain an action point, and they feel incredible. That's how most Runeblades play this. But I found that defend with a Runeblade action card very interesting as well. And so I see this being a very interesting mirror match. I see this being very interesting as, I'm going to throw maybe like a Rune Flash at the opponent, a wizard, and then the wizard tries to pop off. Well, now I can Spellbound Creepers to instant cast this, stop a lot, and maybe even net some mana, which I can then use to Arcane Barrier the rest of it.
So interesting, because in that scenario, you're imagining blocking an attack with an attack.
Against Runeblades, but then against wizards, if I'm attacking and then the Kano tries to combo off on me, I can do something in response to that. Play this card and net a bunch of mana that I can then pump into more Arcane Barrier. So it's like I'm doubling up on my Arcane Barrier for this turn.
And the Ether Drain, it kind of has 2 modes too. You can either pay double for extra Arcane Barrier, or you can gain resources.
Exactly. So this is also great if you don't run a lot of AB in your equipment suite. You can pay extra mana into this to prevent higher amounts of arcane damage.
But you wouldn't gain very many resources.
But you wouldn't gain as many resources, so you're still rewarded for running lots of Arcane Barrier. For the next card that I have with this Runeblade Wizard is Runic Scribing. This is another Runeblade Wizard non-attack action card. I really focus on non-attack action cards because I feel like right now there aren't a lot of great ones for Runeblade. At least in my personal opinion. There's like Mavrian Skies.
I feel like there's a lot of staples in Runeblade, but nothing like
exciting.
Like this is a bomb. You know what I mean? This is gonna like, other than like Mordred-Tide, I would say, or like
or Revel,
actually,
like those big
I don't know,
giant majestics. This is going to be a really interesting rainbow card. Okay. So Runic Scribing, it costs 2. It is red, yellow, blue, rainbow, and it is at the rare slot. Runic Scribing enters the battlefield with 3 verse counters, or 2/1, again rainbow. The next time you would deal arcane damage, remove a verse counter and instead deal that much arcane damage plus 1.
Yikes.
So the whole idea here is that both wizards want to get that extra pump effect. If Kano is trying to combo off, they really like a red Runic Scribing being on the field because the next 3 spells that they're going to cast all get that plus 1 effect on it. But if you also look at this card, you're only really adding 3 damage for 2 mana. That's a bad rate.
You say that, but Kano's math never really works out that way, does it?
And that's what actually makes this card strong, right? I think arcane damage is really interesting in that way. If it's not exactly the same as physical damage, as that sort of straight attack damage, where the rates are a little bit easier. With arcane, you almost need to think about breakpoints being even more important.
You know, my first instinct when I saw this card was, oh no, you can't give Runeblade like higher amounts of arcane damage. You're telling me Runeblade, instead of dealing like 1 and 2 arcane, now it's 2 or 3? That is a huge shift for Runeblade. But it costing 2 is a kind of a hefty cost. Like, it's certainly not strong for that kind of effect. But I thought about it more. I'm like, no, this is more OP in Wizard. Wizard getting 3 arcane sources, an extra +1. Ether Flare, an extra 1, is also an extra 1 to the thing after it. +1, your Ether Wildfire is also a +1 to every other spell that you cast that turn. That is crazy.
Yeah. But for Wizard, you can only really activate it once on each thing. For Runeblade, what makes this interesting is that you can take this all down in a single turn and just put all of those counters onto 3 rune chants.
Yeah.
So 3 rune chants, instead of being 3 sources of 1, it's 3 sources of 2.
Yeah.
Now, again, that's only 3 more damage being added to the turn, but now it's so much harder to Arcane Barrier, which means now you're getting that when you deal arcane damage, gain this effect on your cards.
Ugh.
So now Consuming Volition is more active. Meet and Greet is more active.
That seems incredibly frustrating to play against.
It costs 2, so they have to spend 2 cards just to put it out there, and then it's 3 extra damage in red.
That really isn't that much when you think about it.
What do you think its block value would be?
2 or 3.
Yeah.
I think if like depending on how it play tested, it would, if it's like, oh, this card really isn't doing as much as we thought it would be 3. And then if it's like, no, this card is quite strong, it would be 2.
It would be silly to grab a bunch of these in limited and just stock up.
Oh, yeah, that would be very silly. And then just throw 1 arcade source like, oh, here comes my 1 rune chant. Tick down, tick down, tick down, tick down, tick down, tick down, tick down.
This is 1 for 9.
1 for 9. But you've spent so much time setting it up. For the other combo that I put together, I have Warrior Ranger.
Ooh.
I chose Warrior Ranger because this is a classic fantasy archetype. This is our Aragorn from Lord of the Rings, Drizzt Do'Urden from R.A. Salvatore's novel series, right? It's pretty classic that you like have these fighter rangers, and those two sort of being very close. I also found these interesting because they both have very weapon-centric designs in their classes. For warriors, it's always attacking with your weapons and everything being about your weapon attacks. Well, for ranger, it's all about using your bow to load your arrows and fire. So both game plans revolve around the weapon, and I wanted to see some interesting things in that. The first card I designed for this archetype is Thread the Needle. It's a ranger warrior non-attack action card. It costs 1 and is in rainbow. Put an aim counter on target face-up arrow or weapon until end of turn. The next attack this turn with an aim counter gains piercing, and then rainbow, 3, 2, 1. And when this hits a hero, they take an additional 1 damage.
I love it.
The piercing is really speaking to me.
Yeah. The whole idea is that this is really targeting the little gaps in between the armor of your opponent.
Yeah.
In terms of Azalea, this is really nice because you get to throw this on a dominated attack and discourage your opponent blocking with equipment. In terms of Warrior, I think this is just nice for Warrior in general, of like having high piercing.
Yeah, and I will say, because there's a card that kind of exists like this. It's called Visit the Imperial Forge, which is your sword and dagger attacks gain piercing 3, 2, and 1. And it doesn't give any other on hit. It's just like you have piercing for the turn, right? Which is okay, but this additional damage is kind of interesting because they don't have on hits outside of I can attack again, I get go again, or
those are kind of the only 2.
yeah, that's really it. I was trying to think.
They're important, but yeah.
they are. They're centric to Dorinthia's game plan and Bolton's as well, but outside of that, there's nothing else. So this kind of introduces it to warrior without making it so abhorrent for people fighting against this ranger to like really care, you know?
Yeah. I was definitely thinking of Azalea when I made this, of like those dominate attacks being important. But if you also think that warrior is getting more overpower support as well, this could become important in that regard. Once again, encouraging those armor blocks. This discourages that armor block and gives a little on hit. Mm-hmm. The other really interesting thing here is that both Ranger and Warrior are the only classes currently that have piercing on their cards, and this card also has piercing. So piercing is shared between the two, and now it's on a hybrid card.
That's so cool, Clark. You honed in on that shared design space that only those two have.
Assassin does have piercing on their daggers, but...
Oh my god, you're right.
But
Clark!
But I do like where you're coming from this...
Yeah.
From this piercing angle.
The final card I have for Ranger Warrior, I'm calling Exit Wound. It is a Ranger Warrior attack reaction. It costs 2 and is rainbow. Though, when I was discussing this with Joel earlier, he mentioned maybe wanting this to be majestic. Target attack gains +2, +1, or 0. I think this is the first time we've ever seen something like that, where the rainbow at blue just doesn't give the effect. Mm-hmm. And then the next time an on-hit effect would trigger, that effect occurs an additional time this turn. So you are paying 2 to double up an on-hit effect. So that's 2 remorseless triggers. That is 2 infecting shots.
I didn't even think
2
about
inertia
remorseless.
shots. Mm-hmm.
This is crazy on an attack reaction, because attack reactions do a relatively good job of guaranteeing a hit, and it doubles the hit.
Yeah, it doesn't do too much, though. It only gives +2 or +1 at yellow.
Well, with a card like Remorseless, or even like Searing Shot,
mm-hmm.
right? Searing Shot is a really tame on-hit effect. It just gives a damage. So this card, if it's the difference between an on-hit or not, it's actually like the red is +4
in that sense?
2 mana for 4 damage is not that much.
Closer to 3, because you probably wouldn't count the effect from Searing Shot itself. So okay, I guess it's pretty balanced for Searing Shot. Remorseless is usually like 2 or 3
Remorseless,
damage.
it's a little spooky.
Yeah, because then you're taking 2 on every action
2
card.
on every action card.
That's kind of nuts.
That's kind of spooky, yeah. But I think this is nice because doubling an on-hit effect can seem very good in certain archetypes. Like, I think Dorinthia might even run this as full rainbow, just for Dawnblade.
Oh my god, because then you get 2 extra Dawnblade swings.
2 Dawnblade swings, yeah.
Ooh.
Or no, not Dawnblade swings. It's +1/+1 counters, isn't it? If it hits, it gets to swing an additional time.
Yeah, that's her hero ability. So she'd get 3 attacks that turn essentially.
So if there are multiple on-hit effects, only one of them would double trigger, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you wanted?
And then the person placing it on the sack would get to choose, right?
Yeah.
That is what I wanted. I didn't want it to double multiple because that did seem too strong.
Right.
I mean, yes, this card does cost 2 mana, but I definitely didn't want to like stack a bunch of on-hit effects onto one card. Like, could you imagine this on an arrow? I mean, we mentioned it earlier, toxicity.
You dominate any arrow.
Oh my god, and it's 10 damage? That's actually kind of good.
That's kind of good?
Toxicity OTK decks. Like,
yeah.
But if you stack 2 toxicities, according to this card, it's only 15 damage.
Only gonna double one of them. And toxicity is super, what's it called? It's super telegraphed. Toxicity.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which is why like no one really runs toxicity right now. But I think this is really interesting. I think Ranger really cares about their on hits. I think Warrior really cares about their on hits. Mm-hmm. On hit, go again, anything like that. But also like doubling some of these on hit triggers, doubling some of the on hit effects isn't going to be great. Double go again doesn't really matter.
Well, Dawnblade for Warrior, the thing that puts a counter on is an on-hit effect for the second time that it's hit.
Yeah, that's very good, right?
Yeah.
So it's going to be very good on some on-hits, but not every single on-hit. So that's another reason why I like this card. It is not evergreen good in every single circumstance. You kind of want to line it up with other situations, and you're going to reach a point where you're like, okay, what does my hand actually look like? if I need to be spending my entire hand to get to that point where I am hitting that second time with my Dawnblade, can I really afford having Exit Wound in my deck? Can I afford having that in my hand? Or does it just become too risky?
One thing I think I actually like about this card is that let's say you swing for 7 with an arrow or something, maybe like 1 pump and you swing for 7. And your opponent blocks with 3 cards, like blocks for 9. 9 blocking 7 is actually you can't get over that hump with this card alone, you know? Because it's not a full 3 that you're getting from the effect or even 4, it's just 2. So there's some scenarios where they're not even, it's relatively easy for them to play around this card. They just give an entire card for that last 1 breakpoint, which they might do already in a lot of scenarios.
Yeah, this math also technically breaks what Azalea would really like, which is 1 cost pumps. This is a 2 cost attack reaction. So now it's like, now you need to have a Finals activation to really make this card work. Like, I'm very careful when I was designing all of these cards to not just print super pushed, oh my god, this is so strong. Really more flexible cards that are very grounded, very reasonable, are maybe strong in some circumstances, but not every circumstance. Because I think those are the cards that we need in Flesh and Blood. We need more deliberate deck making rather than, oh, this is cracked, throw it in every deck.
Right.
Because if that's all we're printing, then no one's going to have fun looking at card lists and digging through collections and buying limited to be like, well, maybe this card can be good and maybe I can put this together for my draft to make a deck. That's what I want to see more of in Flesh and Blood. So that's what I designed these cards with.
Yeah, I like these humbler, hybrid card designs. I think this, like if these were cards that were being printed, I would be okay with it because it would mean that, classes get support. It's very like flavorful to each class, but nothing game breaking here.
Yeah. That was definitely the idea. I think there was one situation where I was designing a card earlier where it was like you can get the effect of a weapon twice. Where like I was thinking like, oh, this is cool because like on Death Dealer you would be able to draw 2 cards or like give Dominate and +1 with Shiver. And then I think I looked at one of the Dawnblades and I was like, I can't let this trigger twice. Yeah. That's a little too good. But yeah, those are all my cards for my little custom designs.
Awesome work, Clark.
Thank you. So we teased it at the beginning. This entire time we keep talking about hybrid heroes. Joel, why don't you walk us through some of these hybrid hero designs that we cooked up?
Absolutely. The Blue Pitch, Superclass custom hero design. The class that really sparked all my imagination into this section was the idea of a Viking. And I wanted to combine 2 classes that are my favorite, but don't really have a lot of synergies with each other as it stands. If we were to create the superclass of Viking, I would definitely want it to be Brute and Warrior. Warriors are very like weapon centric. They have a lot of great block values. They're reaction heavy, and they play this sort of mid-range gameplay. That's probably the only thing that Brute and Warrior have in common is that mid-range gameplay. While Brutes, care about large attacks, typically no one on hits, intimidates here and there, and recklessing. So that just means like random discards to get random effects, like go again or dealing 2 extra damage. Or as a game ender, like if you go to 2 forehead, then you lose to recklessing, is the idea there. So, and Brutes also have a lot of like non-blocks, so their defensive capabilities aren't as great as Warriors. So I wanted to fuse them as best I can, like their aggressive capabilities and their defensive capabilities. And I decided to create Bjorn, Harbinger of Storms. And this is a hero who goes on voyages for his king. And legend has it that a storm ravages the land after Bjorn pillages a village.
Dang. So like this guy comes and he like tears up your town. Mm-hmm. And so there's like all this...
And you thought it was over.
Because then the storm comes and you have to sit outside in the rain because he ransacked your house.
Yeah, it's like
that's the real injustice in this whole situation.
Yep. It's like
he only burned down your house so that you'd have to sit in the rain.
Yeah, I don't know. I just thought it was it would be kind of funny, like as a coincidence, and people it's like, oh my god, whenever he comes, there's storms that follow his rampage.
Joel, is this guy this guy a dick?
Kind of, yeah. Well, I mean, he pillages people for a living.
Yeah,
so.
but is he a dick?
Yeah, is he like
Tentatively, yeah.
Is
I
he
would
the
say.
good Viking, the bad Viking, or the morally gray Viking?
I would say morally gray. I don't think he's like strictly bad.
Okay, I know I ignored this earlier, but I think pillaging villages is objectively bad.
Yeah, maybe he's a douchebag.
I know I'm playing all sides of this joke. Call me names if you want. I think he's a dick.
All right, what does Bjorn Harbinger of Storms do?
So he's very centered around rage token. So his hero ability reads, your attacks have +1 as long as you have a rage token. At the start of your end phase, if you have not taken or dealt damage this turn, destroy all rage tokens you control. And then most likely with these super classes, there'll be like a reminder text that says Viking is a super class of Brute and Warrior. You may have Viking, Brute, and Warrior cards in your deck.
So wait, is this your end phase or each end phase?
Your end phase.
Can it be each end phase?
Why? How are you making them on your opponent's turn?
It's more because destroy all rage tokens if you haven't taken or dealt damage.
Right.
So it encourages you to take damage on your opponent's turn. If your opponent just wanted to pass the turn, they could destroy all your rage tokens.
I think we should see where he's going with this.
Yeah,
Sure.
Yeah,
Before we
my
make big
next point
changes.
will make it a little bit more clear. So a rage token says when you attack with an attack action or a weapon, you may destroy X rage tokens where X cannot be less than 1 and lose 1 health for each token destroyed. For every 3 tokens you destroy this way, intimidate. So this was my attempt at like dealing yourself damage and keeping yourself in a rage. Like in the battle, you want to be raging constantly, like, you know, a D&D barbarian, for instance. Mm-hmm. I still wanted to incorporate intimidate without making it just like this on-demand broken mechanic. Like I wanted you to kind of build it up over time. Mm-hmm. And 3 I thought was like a good enough reward where like you take 3 damage and you kind of guarantee whatever on hits you have or just guarantee more damage that way and reducing your opponent's ability to block. And, you know, Viking, you're so intimidated. Like, you're not going to fight one and just be, like, calm, cool, collected. Like, this is a ginormous hero, theoretically, so.
And this is a lot of rage you got to build up.
Yeah, exactly. So,
I would expect to be making at least 2 per turn in order to be able to build up at all.
right. So, the idea here was with these Viking cards, these newer cards, you would create tokens that way, and then you still have the Brute cards in your deck and the Warrior cards, which don't interact with rage in any way. Yet, you know, so there would be, you kind of want to be keeping track of it, like another sort of mini game, like with Leviathan, for instance. Like you want to keep track of your blood debt. This is like a new way of like, okay, I have another resource, but I have to kind of keep building it up over time, or I lose them, and try to set up for these like impactful turns where I like break 3 of them or break 6 of them and get a really good play or even close out the game. And it's more controlled that way. It's like taking the consistency of Warrior and trying to flat out the randomness of the Brute while still having components of both.
This is also, you have to lose a health for each token, and you only really get value for destroying rage tokens at 3.
It's a lot of damage.
Yeah, well, you also have the +1 from your hero ability. So what I didn't write down in my notes, but the way that this hero ability reads, similar to Channel Mount Heroic, is that this makes all your Brute cards like at yellow or blue become like yellow 6s or blue 6s. So you could play things like yellow Wild Rider or yellow Pulping, cards that were useless in every constructed deck, but now you can play them at 6s because if you discard them to these effects, you get the bonus of discarding your 6 power.
Yeah, and because this is also a static effect, then if you destroy all your rage tokens to intimidate away all their cards, you lose that +1 effect.
Yep.
Especially if you're building around it. That's really important. And I'm sure Warrior, if you want to focus on more on the Warrior side, would just love to have all of their attacks have +1 because all of those weapon attacks suddenly get a lot more valuable.
Right, like if you're swinging with a Dawn Blade for 3, it's like, okay, just block with 1 card or 2 card to block any, you know, Dawn Blade swing plus a 3-card pump like with Iron Sign Response. But making it that 4 makes it really awkward unless you have a defense reaction in arsenal or a piece of armor you can throw in like preemptively. So that was kind of my thinking with it. Like, and like you said, Clark, you know, if you break these rage tokens, what do you have left over to buff the attack itself? So you want to like avoid going directly to 0 rage tokens because then you don't get any bonuses. So you kind of want to keep 1 at all times.
You're always looking for your rage tokens to be 1 above the multiple of 3. You want 4 or 7 or 10.
Right. That way you can get the intimidates without losing, your inherent power increase with these rage tokens and make use of like the health that you're losing by breaking them. That was kind of my idea. In addition to these new Viking cards creating rage tokens through like maybe on hits, I think on hits would probably be best in a deck like this because you want to be taking or dealing damage per turn. So in addition, I designed a chess piece for this new Viking called Vestige of the Red Serpent. And it's a legendary chess piece, once per turn action for 3 resources. You create a rage token and a quicken token, go again. And this would be like Blade Break 2 because it, like a lot of brute equipment has Blade Break and a lot of warrior equipment has really good like activated abilities. So I wanted to have both in one. That way, like if you need to make a decision, like I'm just going to break this, I have enough rage tokens to close out the game. Let me just catch this in for its block value. So my idea here is you pitch a blue at the start of your turn to create that rage token. So this turns on your buff for the turn, and it gives you a quicken token so that if you attack with a weapon, that weapon has go again. Like if you want to start off with a Dawnblade swing and maybe see if your turn can turn into a Dawnblade counter, or if you want to just give your next brute attack go again regardless of what you draw discard or if it has go again or not. I just wanted to give a aggressive option without relying specifically on Scabskin Leathers to give yourself extra action points. Because with these super classes, you want to avoid from making them just strictly better than one or the other of the classes that they're combining. I want to give incentive to use a chess piece that can give you like this advantage in game without using these inherently broken mechanics like Scabskin Leathers or, Courage of Blade Hold, I guess.
I think a blue for a rage and a quicken is pretty all right. I mean, pay 3 mana to give go again doesn't seem like a crazy broken ability. And also slowly stacking up those rages. I guess my question is like, how can an opponent interact with the rage token minigame?
Currently, I would say that you can't. It's kind of like materials in a way with like Dromai. Like it's just something I build up over turn, albeit a little bit more like inefficiently, like by pitching a blue every turn. But the idea is that it's something that I have to manage. Like, I have to make sure that I'm dealing myself damage or securing damage onto my opponent to keep these rage tokens around.
I think there actually might be one way, which is full block out. And if you're able to full block out this Viking's turn and they don't sacrifice a rage to keep themselves enraged, then there's a chance that they just get completely screwed over of like, oh, I lost all this rage I was building up.
Yeah, exactly. And that's definitely a minigame on your opponent's turn. Like, okay, I'm recognizing that maybe they're trying to save up for this. For instance, if the Viking has 1 more card in hand, they don't have go again. They didn't create a rage token, or they didn't break a rage token. So maybe they're trying to save it for next turn and create another one up to 3 or something like that. So they just block out, steal all tempo, and the Viking has to kind of rebuild that rage over time. So that is one way you could counter this, hero.
I like how you put a Viking chest equipment that is able to give you more action points in the form of the quicken token. Because right now, Brute's best legs is Scabskin Leathers, right? Are we making another Scabskin hero? I think by consistently attaching the quicken token to something you wanted to already make, it allows us to have other ways of getting action points more consistently and gives us reasons to be able to branch out away from Scabskin's Leathers in a way that's not very OP, just consistent. Is that counter to Brute's philosophy? Maybe, but it's something that can appeal to players and gives them another option, and I think it's a very solid one compared to Scabskin Leathers.
I mean, it's also very interesting in that, like, this feels probably really good with the 4-card hand, but it probably feels horrible with the 2-card hand.
Yeah.
Or a 1-card hand. So, like, if the opponent ever starts getting tempo on the Viking really needs to throw something, attack with something, and then still sacrifice. So, like, if you only have a 1-card hand to attack with your weapon, you can't be using it to build a rage because then you're just going to lose that rage. So you're really only spending that 1 card to get a quicken token to stick around.
Maybe the weapon itself would give rage.
There's definitely a lot of room to see, like even if the weapon costs something, like if a Viking weapon like just says, sacrifice a rage token attack or 0 attack and like gets buffed in some other way, that could be another way to kind of give Viking more options when it's just like you said, that 2-card hand or 1-card hand where you can't really do much. You're just like pitching for a weapon and then you're already using a rage token.
I think this is also nice in that Venn diagram idea that I sort of brought up earlier of like we're trying to find these like little middle sections and develop those out. And so if you at home are sitting there listening and going, wait, why not just make this a brand new class? Like, why even let it use brute and warrior? Like, if you're building this brand new mechanic, whatever, yelling at us from beyond the pale, then the reason why is because, well, we don't want to, or we want it to be more interesting in terms of choices, right? Of like, yes, you do still need to make sure that you're running Viking cards, but we don't want to print 80 Viking cards. We only want to print 10, 20 Viking cards and support the rest of the possible deck list with brute and warrior cards.
Because this could also theoretically allow more design for brute and warrior, again, without giving it an entirely new set. It's like alongside this hero, there would probably be a warrior card that cares about, attack action cards, or maybe a way to generate rage tokens on a warrior side or brute side, because there's still going to be like theoretically some overlap. And, I've said this on the pod before, but brute is held back in a lot of ways because of scabskin leathers. Like, you can only give it so much before, if I'm rolling scabs every turn, getting 2 to 3 actions and just really abusing these large attacks, then this is a good way to explore that space if brute was, designed in a different way. Like, what if it wasn't brute? What if it was like a Viking? Maybe this was like originally how it wasn't intended, and brute is just going down this different path than how it first started. That's kind of how I see it as well.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And with that being said, I think it's time to go ahead and hit the Arsenal Zone.
Our Arsenal Zone is the section of our podcast where we get to shout out a card that we've been maybe playing a lot with recently, or we just think is really interesting and we want to devote a little bit of time to, but not like a whole segment. So it's jumping off, starting the Arsenal Zone for me. I'm going to talk about Slogism. Slogism is a great card. It is 3 mana to give your next card with cost 2 or greater +6. So I first started looking at this card when I was building a rune chant stacking Viserai deck. And I just wanted to play on that idea of, even if I reduce the cost of the card through my rune chants, it still has a high cost. And then this will still work. So it's like, whoa, 2 cards to give +6 to my 9th blade? That's crazy. I ended up cutting it. I don't think it's all that great, but I think it's awesome that we have a card like Slogism in the game. It's always going to be this generic thing. It's always going to be something where if you're running a lot of 2-cost attacks, you should be looking at. I think Azuri should be looking at this card.
Interesting.
Yeah, there is something to be said for just throwing a bunch of damage on top of an attack. This is something I've started thinking about more as I grind Viserai for Nationals. There is something beyond just having big numbers on one turn. Like, one big attack is sometimes more terrifying than lots of smaller attacks.
Yeah.
I've started realizing. I think having something like Slogism is really interesting. Slogism was also paired with Regurgitating Slog as another one of those really cool card combos.
Yo, 2-card card combos. I fucking love 2-card card combos.
Yeah, we've already talked about Nimblism and Nimble Strike in Arsenal Zone previously. And so Slogism is also half of one of those. So every time you see LSS print another 2-cost 6 card, just think, can I run Slogism now? Because you should. It's Slogism and Pummel. Slogism and Pummel, they go together like bread and more bread.
So for my card, and this is actually one of the design spaces I was thinking of for my Viking hero as well. Ravenous Meat Axe. Why the fuck does Ravenous Axe with 0 axe support? So I was thinking like, okay, if I were to make a Viking, I would have all access to all the warrior cards that buff axes, and then I could play Ravenous Meat Axe for like 2 for 5, you know? So that's kind of what I was thinking about. Draws and discards you a card. It's really great and limited because that's the only web bean you can use with Levia. Other than that, it's pretty mid. I want there to be more like weapon support for brutes. So until then, we just have draw and discard. At least you're getting a Kano. That's really it. Shout out to Ravenous Meat Axe for filling my graveyard.
For my card shout out today, I want to get personal. I'm so happy to be a member of the Flesh and Blood community. And one of the first projects that I got to work on that really made me say I'm part of something bigger than just myself as a player is the Talishar roguelike. Online, I would be at my job playing the Talishar roguelike instead of working because it was something that you could do single player. And the guy who made Talishar, Nate, he made this proof of concept which just had like 3 fights, some little rewards, and I could play it over and over again, and it was so fun. And I know like a little bit of programming, so I decided to go in and volunteer to spend some time expanding the idea and creating a full adventure. It was basically me and one other guy coding the entire thing. It's one of my favorite things I've ever worked on, and core to that experience was a card called On Guard.
Let's go! It's On Guard!
So this card was printed in Classic Battles, Dorinthia versus Rhinar, and it is a strictly worse version of Warrior's Valor. It is not a card that LSS intended to be strong. It is a card that is meant for teaching. It is a card that is meant to teach you how the game works. That way you can understand pump effects, right? Mm-hmm. Simple stuff. What does go again mean? Go again means you can do another thing after. And this card is great for the roguelike, where you start with a bad deck with bad cards, but serviceable, and you can replace them with good, better cards later. This On Guard, what if you could turn it into a Warrior's Valor? There's a lot of potential with this card. It's just asking to have more effects. At a recent armory, they were giving out these promos from the like commons at Classic Battles, and I saw On Guard. I was like, I knew I had to have a playset. I knew I had to own at least one copy of this card and give them out to my fellow podcast hosts on
That's why you were trading for them. I was like, why do you care what promo I got, bro?
Because I love this card. It feels like it plays an important part in my Flesh and Blood history, believe it or not. And I wanted to share that with you guys, so I have a copy for you. They're rainbow foil promos. When I got them, they were on TCG Player for like $9. Now they're like $7. But
oh, wow.
I got these copies for 2 booster packs each. I traded 2 booster packs of Dusk Till Dawn for these bad boys.
Dang.
And the moment that you sign them, they're going to be
priceless.
Wait, I think the time finally came. Like, we were dreading this day where he signs a promo, right?
Yeah.
Honestly, that story really touched me, so I'm
yeah,
okay.
no, that was very sweet.
Here you go, boys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, that signature is so crisp, too.
The roguelike now is got some big bugs, and neither of us have touched it for a while, but it's still up there on the main site. You can play it. I'm hoping that eventually I get back to fixing it up and doing more with it, but right now it's just my memories of creating it and something that new players can hopefully play to experience the game more, and it's fun. I still recommend it.
I played it back in like when it was, you know, just this one little thing attacking me with its tusk over and over. But it was a lot of fun. It was a very fresh take on Flesh and Blood. I enjoyed it.
Pitch It To Me podcast is hosted by Fuzzy Delp, Clark Moore, and Joel Recinos. Executive producer, Talon Stradley. Logistics coordinator, John Farkas. Music by Dillon Hulse. Logo by Han V. Sound mixing, Christopher Moore. And last but not least, you! Thank you for listening. Please give us a follow on your favorite social media platform at Pitch It To Me Podcast. Stay tuned for some outtakes. Or like 3 classes.
Wow, 3 whole classes?
Now we're just-
No. Fuzzy, I think you're getting fucking ridiculous, okay? I think you really need to take a hard look at yourself
Isn't that just generic?
and slow down. Quiet you.
A hybrid card that you can play in any
Wait,
class.
generic?
Any class. Like assassin/ninja, assassin/ninja, assassin/ranger.
Yeah. Assassin/ninja, and of course the other one that we all know,